Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Port of Los Angeles July Media Briefing. I'm Philip Sanfield, the Port's Communications Director, and joining us after his recent travels to Taiwan, China, and Japan is our Executive Director, Gene Seroka. Welcome, Gene. It's good to have you back in LA.
Thank you, Philip, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Representing the Port of LA is always a privilege, whether it's meeting with shipping lines in Taipei, discussing green shipping corridors with partners in Shanghai, or presenting our decarbonization strategies to the International Association of Ports and Harbors in Tokyo. Still, I'm always so grateful to land back at LAX and return home to the great city and port of Los Angeles. I'm excited about today's event and our guest, Matt Priest. Matt's the president and CEO of the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. The FDRA's membership includes both large and small companies, representing 95% of U.S. footwear sales. I'm sure we're all interested to hear Matt's perspective on the current factors impacting the supply chain, especially as retailers gear up for the year-end holiday season. And of course, we'll both be available to take your questions as well.
Thank you, Gene. Well, here we are, the 2024 halfway mark. Please take us through the Port's June numbers and our year-to-date performance.
Of course, Philip. June was a great month here in Los Angeles, capping off a stellar first half of the year. We handled a healthy 828,000 20-foot equivalent units in June. That's 10% more than May and about equal to last June's performance, which was our strongest month of 2023. Starting with imports, we processed 429,000 container units, which is 10% more than last month and again on par with June of 2023. Consistently strong economic data highlighted by declining inflation, higher wages, and a robust job market is fueling consumer confidence and spending. That's resulted in a steady flow of cargo volume, not only here in Los Angeles, but at ports across the country. And I think we'll see this pattern continue as we move into the third quarter. Turning to exports, we shipped 122,000 loaded containers across the Pacific in June, which is an increase of 13% over last year. It also marks the 13th consecutive month of year-on-year improvement here at the Port of LA. And there's more opportunity on the export front. In Los Angeles this year, we've imported 3.1 containers for every export box, which represents somewhat of a trade imbalance. So we remain dedicated to our efforts with American manufacturers, agricultural interests, policymakers, along with other stakeholders to boost outbound trade. Meanwhile, empty containers landed at 276,000 TEUs, a 17% increase over May, but slightly lower compared to last year at this time. We're watching the situation because there's been a shortage of empty containers in Asia due to elongated transit times and congestion in some overseas locations. Midway through 2024, the port has moved 4.7 million TEUs. That's a 14% increase compared to last year and also surpasses our 5-year average. In short, our cargo volume has remained steady. And equally important, efficiency on and around our marine terminals has been consistent. Overall, Philip, it's been an excellent 6 months here in Los Angeles.
Thank you, Gene. Moving forward, what kind of volume do you expect to see here in LA in the months ahead?
Philip, July is going to be another strong month, with volume reaching the mid to upper 800,000 TEU range. Retailers and e-commerce outlets have already replenished their stocks of back-to-school items. In fact, Amazon is currently winding down its 10th annual Prime Day event this evening. Now we're seeing fall fashion, Halloween, and year-end holiday products moving through the supply chain. Looking further ahead, I'm optimistic about the remainder of the year for these 3 reasons. First, U.S. fundamentals look good. As I noted earlier, the health of the American economy continues to be the primary driver of our cargo volume. I heard this theme repeatedly during my recent visits to Asia, where I met with 3 prominent shipping lines as well as multiple retailers and manufacturers. All of them remain encouraged about the upcoming summer market. Second, we're operating at about 75 to 80% of historical capacity, leaving ample room for handling more cargo efficiently. I closely monitor the vital statistics on our operational dashboard each morning, and I'm pleased to report that they're now at or even better than pre-COVID levels. That's everything from rail dwell times to truck turns to cargo exchanges on each vessel. As many of you know, our Port Optimizer data provides stakeholders with up to 40 days of advanced visibility on their cargo, effectively enabling us to see around corners and over hills. This ability to anticipate and address potential issues allows us to resolve challenges much quicker than ever before. And third, we may see additional cargo as a hedge to various issues happening around the world today. Since last November, importers and exporters have told me they were considering shifting some volume to Los Angeles in case those circumstances become more pronounced. The bottom line? Here in Los Angeles, we're prepared to take on more cargo. With a solid U.S. economy, fluidity on our docks, and room to grow, we're in very good shape moving into the second half of the year.
Great context, Gene. Thank you. And now, would you please introduce Matt?
Certainly, Philip. Matt Priest is a highly respected figure in the footwear industry, serving as the president and CEO of the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America since year 2016. Under his leadership, the organization has become the leading trade association for the industry, representing nearly 500 companies and brands. Matt's known for his deep understanding of the industry's dynamics, as well as his expertise and perspective on various trends that impact the supply chain. Thank you, Matt, for joining us today from your home in Northern Virginia. It's great to see you again.
Hey, Gene. It's great to see you as well, my friend.
Let's jump in right away, Matt. Here in Los Angeles, footwear ranks as one of the top 10 drivers of import volume year after year. So please, give us a snapshot of your membership and the state of the industry overall.
You bet, Gene. We are an industry, a $114 billion industry at retail. We import in 2.5 billion pairs of shoes every single year. That's about 7 pairs of shoes for every single person in this country every single year. So the volume is massive, and nearly 2/3 of our volume comes through the Los Angeles port complex. So we love your port. We love to bring product through your port, and we've had a long-term relationship with you all. And 99% of our shoes are imported that we sell here in the U.S. So we have heavily relied on global supply chains and ports of entry for a long time and continue to do so. And so I'm excited about this conversation because, to your point, the industry is optimistic, it's resilient. A lot of the fundamentals that are out there are strong. Our consumers in certain areas might be a little challenged in certain spots within the economy. We definitely have some policy perspectives as to what may happen with tariff policy that we can get to in a minute. But for all intents and purposes, the American footwear industry is resilient, strong, and we love importing shoes for sure.
Truly appreciate the membership in you for all the support down the years. Matt, from a supply chain perspective, how are retailers and distributors planning for the second half of 2024, particularly the all-important year-end holidays?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gene. So we obviously bring in a ton of product, and we've been in this environment where our inventories have been elevated. That's not unique to footwear. And in fact, we have an inventory tracker we're publishing on Monday for the industry. And for us, inventories have been coming down as we've been right-sizing our assortments for consumer demand, which is still strong, but they are still historically high. So we have a lot of product, and we're continuing to bring in that product. As we sit right now, we're seeing I think, in advance of the movement of goods to get product in more quickly ahead of the holiday season for a variety of reasons. Some of that is policy driven, some of that is driven obviously by economics. And we are excited about what we can bring to our consumers this year. But it's not without headwinds, it's not without challenges, as we've learned. And we actually hosted a supply chain summit at the New York Stock Exchange just yesterday, where 120 footwear sourcing executives gathered to conversate around the impact certain policy decisions are having on the movement of our goods. We're highly tariffed, and what the potential for tariffs might bring for us as far as volume. But we also talked about some of the opportunities that we're seeing to continue to bring in product. And so we're anticipating a strong holiday season. And we're hoping just to have some equilibrium, Gene. It's been a year after year of just very strange dynamics, a lot of different generational variables that our supply chain executives have had to deal with. And so they're more resilient and wiser, to say the least. But we still have, again, a lot of optimism. We share that with you.
Great recap, Map. And all of us are watching events around the world, geopolitical, regional, local. What's on the radar of your members right now? And because of some of those issues, are they shifting even a little bit more cargo to the West Coast in response?
That's a great question. We obviously have a love affair with the West Coast as it relates to imports. Over 90% of our volume come from China, Vietnam, and Indonesia, right? We're not highly diversified as other industries because footwear production is still labor intensive. It takes a lot of hands to create and ship and bring in 2.5 billion pairs of shoes every year. And so our direct access to the West Coast ports has been critically important to our industry. That being said, the challenges that you referenced, the ones obviously in the Red Sea and Panama Canal, may affect some product of some of our global brands that are moving product from Asia into the European market, but they are having an impact on overall rates. Rates are higher than they've been for us in well over 2 years, and so we're seeing a spike in those rates. We are obviously concerned. There's been a couple variables that have driven that, we think. One was the president's announcement around electric vehicle tariffs not too long ago, which begin August 1st. And so we think there's been a run on capacity there to get product in before those tariffs take effect. They did impact us directly, but they impact us in driving rates up. And then there's the whole question about if the former president wins election in November, and his proposals to have a universal tariff on all goods of 10%, and then tariffs on Chinese goods at 60%. That is obviously driving a lot of interest for our members about how to start to bring in product maybe prior to some of those decisions to push duties up, which therefore obviously would impact costing and our consumers who ultimately pay the price of those duties. So it's not, sourcing in the 21st century is not for the faint of heart. But our members have, as I said before, have been resilient and have a lot of wisdom just based on the last few years of what they've dealt with.
You're right, Matt. And looking back, it seems like a quick blink of an eye, but it's been almost 6 years now that we've been looking at these tariff regimes and changing trade policies, the spotlight that's been on the supply chain from Main Street to My Street back to capitals and Washington itself. So it's a lot for many of us to take in, and we've got to stay ahead of the game in this supply chain. From my side, last question, on the data front, what kind of information do your members need from the ports and other stakeholders to make more informed decision and try to stay ahead of all those variables in this wide-reaching equation?
The one thing we've learned since the start of the pandemic and then the subsequent years, Gene, is the fact that we need to have full supply chain visibility. On the regulatory side, we have governments around the world demanding more supply chain traceability and visibility as to who makes our products and where the materials come from. And that's been a heavy lift for our industry as well. But that extends itself into full supply chain visibility. And your team and the team at the Port of Los Angeles was so helpful when we were in the throes of the run on inventory and demand that we saw from the American consumer not too long ago, to where we had containers backed up, we had them held in certain places, and you all were helping us shake those trees and find those containers. And it really taught our members, Gene, that that not knowing where your goods are at any given moment is not a good strategy. So having that full line of sight from factory floor to consumer retail shelf is so critically important and should not be taken for granted. So the more information we have, that dashboard you mentioned that importers have access to, we publish it for our member. We send it out and reference it for our members so that they know that the ports, such as the Port of LA, are putting out this information to have. There's no excuse not to know kind of volume and how much where containers are coming through and what some of the holdups may be. And then the last thing I'll say is, from a trade association perspective, we're curating these conversations around supply chain visibility. So we have a weekly call. We call it our family meeting every 2 o'clock East Coast time on Tuesdays. And the Port of LA is on that call and providing critical updates to our members every single week as to what you all are seeing on the front lines of the port of entry. So all that to say is the information is there for our members and creating more visibility throughout the supply chain that's so critically important.
Really great recap, Matt. And I can remember years ago when we started talking about this issue with your members and you, there were some outside of our discussion that were really concerned about what it meant to share information, create that heightened level of visibility. And to me now, some 9 years on, it's made us a lot smarter and helped our decision making. We may not be able to fix everything, but as long as we know what the landscape looks like, we can attack it together. So I really appreciate your thoughts today. And let's now shift over and take some questions from the media. Philip, back over to you.
Thank you both. So as usual, we've received several questions in advance, and we're going to start with those. If any media members have a question to ask, in addition, please type it into the Q&A box below, and remember to include your name and affiliation. Let's start with Bill Mongaluzzo from the Journal of Commerce, and this is for you, Matt. As footwear sourcing continues to shift from China to Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent, where production and transportation infrastructure are not as well developed, are importers experiencing supply chain challenges that they do not face in China?
Thanks for that question, Bill. I hope you're doing well, my friend. It's been a while since we've spoken. You know, for our industry, we source, again, as I said, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, well over 90% of our volume. Well before September 1st, 2019, when the additional tariffs on Chinese footwear went into effect, an additional $1 billion a year. We pay $4 billion a year in tariffs, just to give people an idea. Well before that, we were shifting out of China because of the cost of living, because of the workforce not interested in working in footwear factories. And we were moving to Vietnam, and that was a trend that has continued now for well over a decade. So most of the market share China has shed has been captured by Vietnam, and in partnership with Taiwanese joint venture companies, local Vietnamese companies, even Chinese joint venture companies, we have been producing tons of shoes in Vietnam and elsewhere. And because of the well-developed infrastructure for those places, the answer to that question is we haven't really seen any issues that we didn't deal with in China, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean as we migrate more to India, and we maybe do more in Bangladesh, and we maybe head back into the Western Hemisphere, that some of those might not pop up. But because we're consolidated amongst basically 3 countries right now from a sourcing perspective, the transit issues that we've dealt with have been the normal run of, I mean, they haven't been normal as we've been talking about, but they've been kind of the same ones we would have dealt with if we were exporting out of China. And so I appreciate that question, Bill, and encourage you to ask any others that you might have.
Thank you. The next question is from Deborah Belgum from Women's Wear Daily. This is for both Matt and Jean. And the question is, how would a potential Trump presidency impact the supply chain and sourcing, particularly from China? Matt, you've already spoken to this a little bit. We'll start with you and then get any additional thoughts from Jean. Matt?
Look, the former president is putting out a lot of proposals that would fundamentally alter the approach to trade, or at least continue the trends that he put forward in his first term. And so we now have a record of policy decisions behind us that help inform us on how to best kind of navigate that scenario. For us as an industry, part of it is engaging with the administration, one, in a respectful way, We understand that there's kind of a rise in consideration of the utility of tariffs, but we're also the poster child of how tariffs did not keep domestic production in place. We, again, pay $4 billion a year in tariffs, and we have 99% import penetration. So our hope is that if there are decisions made that are include additional tariffs, which is a real possibility that we have to plan for, and our members are planning for, that we engage with the administration, no matter who it is, whether it's a second Biden term or it's a second Trump administration, that we talk about how footwear is not a critical industry from China's perspective, from other countries' perspectives. It's an important industry. It employs people, but it's not one of these where it's high tech or electric vehicles or some of the other areas that the United States has highlighted as strategically important industries. And so we're planning for it. We will advocate. I'm a lobbyist, so we will be out there engaging with policy members and discussing how tariffs are paid by American consumers, and they increase prices on American goods that are imported. And so a lot of our talk yesterday is how do we bring in goods more quickly, earlier? How do we continue to shift out of China? And I think we'll continue to see those areas of focus moving forward.
Thank you, Matt. Gene, any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, appreciate Matt's comments moments ago and just now. I think there's a long way from here to there, whatever there may be. And Matt restated some of what we've heard publicly about tariffs on more than $3 trillion worth of goods coming into the U.S. That, if true, and it does come to fruition, that could change the landscape, the future of the Port of L.A. But I think what we've done so far, and dating back to the original trade policies in the spring of 2018, we've shown to be pretty nimble, and we've certainly been out there hustling for cargo. I've said in this media briefing before that closing calendar year 2022, the Port of Los Angeles' business portfolio was comprised of 57% related to China. The next year it dropped down to 53%, and right now through the mid-year point of 2024, we're in the low to mid 40s as far as our China component of all the business that we do here at the Port of LA. That means that we've picked up traction in Southeast and South Asian nations, and we've done more for cross-border activity in and out of Mexico with the manufacturing and retail communities there. We'll continue to do just that. As these trade winds shift, we'll be out in front and continuing to bring this cargo. We're up 14% year to date off a year in 2023 that saw us kind of work through inventories, but we're seeing the components of those other geographies really pick up steam. So there's more to come in this area. Thanks, Deborah. Appreciate you joining as always.
Thank you, Gene. Don Lee from the LA Times just dropped a question into the Q&A box. We'll go to that one. It's from Matt. Matt, you mentioned that we're seeing challenges in some consumer segments. Don's asking which ones in particular specifically, and also if tariffs rise 10% universally and 60% for China, what percent is likely to be passed on to consumers?
Thanks for those questions, Don. The first one, as it relates to, I'll take the second one first. When we look at the tariffs that are being proposed, the universal tariff, that 10%, and then potentially 60% on Chinese goods, we're not quite sure. And to Gene's point, there's a long way to go. Some of this will obviously take congressional agreement and legislation and change in law. The president can also use the 301 structure, which he has done in the past, and President Biden has used. So there are tools available, but we have a long way to go till we get to that point. The fact of the matter is, any cost that's added at the border on a good is going to drive up the cost to consumers, and as much as possible is passed on to consumers just based on the consumer's appetite and resiliency for those cost increases, not just tariffs, but the amount of cargo it takes, the labor costs, all that is baked in. And so we can anticipate that if there are additional duties on product, on footwear, that those will be passed on to the consumer. What I think we don't have line of sight in is to whether or not that would be in lieu of current duty rates. Some of our duty rates are 60, 70% already. So would that be on top of some of those rates? Would that be in lieu of? And that we don't have clarity on. Your first question, Don, is around consumer areas. We're seeing kind of the sub $100,000 household income levels, start to see some softening within our consumer base. Obviously, inflation impacts that group of families the most. The cost of goods at the grocery store, like Gene said, we're seeing the rate of inflation start decelerate. So there's still inflation. It's coming down that rate, but that has real life consequences on a working family and families as we head towards back to school. And so we're just, again, footwear is kind of the barometer of the overall health of the economy because people need to buy shoes. They have to wear them. And we're often pretty resilient in a down economy. But the fact of the matter is we are seeing a little bit of softening in that space. And the question remains is, do we see a pickup towards the back half of the year? And does the consumer start to gain some steam? As long as unemployment's low and wages are up and employment is up, that is entirely possible, but we'll have to see what the data shows.
Very good. Matt, next question is for you from Lisa Bartline at Reuters. Are your members bringing in holiday goods early this year? If so, how early? And secondly, what impacts do you think, what do you think that is having on shipping rates? What impact do you think bringing in early is having on shipping rates?
Yeah, good question, Lisa. So we are bringing in product, and I think we're not alone in this from an industry perspective. We are bringing product in a little bit earlier as it relates to holiday. These last few years have really created, for lack of a better term, PTSD as to the impacts that we've seen on demand, on the inflation of not of pricing, but the dumping of money into the economy that really drove consumer demand, that then drove us to find and chase product. And so to have kind of a breath-catching year where we can kind of slow down, be more methodical, bring in product a little bit earlier, try not to be like a victim of kind of these historic and seasonal spikes and run on demand. I think that's a part of what's happening, but we're seeing the rates go up based on some of the challenges we talked about globally. I checked in with a couple of our members yesterday. Spot rates are starting to ease up a bit. What we don't know is if we'll see August and September, which are the traditional months to bring in for holiday, if we'll see those as continue to be strong. We're really in a point right now, Lisa, where we're trying to figure out where the consumer's at. And as I always tell our members, inventory management, importation of goods is an art mixed with a little science. And as we've seen, we've overshot years where we brought in too much product based on demand. We've undershot years, as we saw just a couple of years ago. And I suspect that we'll continue to see strong flow of goods moving forward, just a more methodical approach to bringing those goods in.
Thank you, Matt. Another question from the chat box for Gene. This is from Stas Margaronis of the American Journal of Transportation. Gene, HMM just announced a new service to Lazaro Cardenas from Shanghai. Is this service to Mexico going to have any impact on volumes at the Port of LA?
Hi, Stas. Thanks for joining as always. The Pacific coast of Mexico, Manzanillo, Lazaro Cardenas are really building up. And as you know, across a variety of sectors, manufacturing, automotive, tiered suppliers, household appliances, Mexico's booming. And it is the United States' #1 trading partner. I don't know that this one service by the great company HMM is going to detract from the growth trajectory that we're on right now for a couple reasons. We've outlined the underlying economic rationale and some of the flashpoints happening around the country and the world that are driving a little bit more cargo here. But realistically speaking, what we're seeing now in the Trans-Pacific theater are additional capacity, extra loaders, and cargo coming over that normally was not projected. So as an example, right now we've got 63 ships en route from Asia to the San Pedro Bay complex. Normally, in peak season is broadly defined, we'd have about 52 to 55 ships. We're also seeing pretty good utilization on these vessels. Those 63 ships account for more than 570,000 T's worth of cargo. So folks are ramping up. Again, you're not bringing as much product through the other two canals as you normally would. A little bit more coming here, and Mexico is on the rise. But I still like our projections and our opportunities for the second half of the year. Good research there, Stas. Thanks again for joining.
Gene, this is from Eric Watkins for you. The cost of a shipping container from Shanghai to East Coast is as high as $10,000 now on the spot rate, more than double from February. What's going on here, and are these rates adversely impacting the Port of LA?
Well, this is a psychological number, Eric, that worries a lot of people, but it's all about the supply-demand equation. Earlier in these discussions, dating back to, say, third and fourth quarter of last year, many people were talking about the amount of new build vessel capacity that was going to be entering the market, and would it cause a curve where prices could go down. Then we started to see the attacks from the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea, dropping the number of crossings in the Suez Canal. They plummeted to, according to published reports, dropping 80 to 90% over the course of this time period. That new build capacity was absorbed into those traditional Middle East routes because they're now going around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, adding 10, 14, even longer transits to get to the European continent, the Med, the UK, and then for those services that come to the East Coast. There's also more fuel burn. On some accounts, we're hearing reports that it's $1 million more use of fuel for every vessel sailing because of that extended transit. And with those three distinct headline issues, as Matt said, you're seeing some folks ship a little bit earlier than normal so they don't get into a space crunch. As cargo shifts into that Pacific theater, even fractionally, we've had importers and exporters tell us they want to get on those weekly services out of Asia to the West Coast. In the event something really goes wrong, they've already got a name brand on those sailings. And they're not coming in at a time where there's roll pools and the inability to get on ships moving towards Southern California or other West Coast ports. So we'd like to see these prices come down because they are an important component of the overall U.S. consumer thought process on that landed price. But realistically speaking, with reports of congestion in Singapore because timing is so far off on a lot of these ships, you're going to see prices stay elevated for some time. But all in all, please remember that in the Trans-Pacific market, about 90% of all business is contracted on an annual basis, maybe some a little bit less, some a little bit longer. So that spot market that so many pay attention to is on a relatively small percentage of all the trade. What we don't know, and what was witnessed during COVID, is once a contract holder surpasses their minimum quantity commitment to ship, do they go into an environment of spot rates, or can they continue on, possibly through renegotiation, or with their current contracted prices? That's why we watch this space so much. Not that it's going to throw the market on its ear, but what are the next steps going to be as the progression takes place during more busy times in the weeks and months ahead? Eric, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. Deborah Belgum has a follow-up on the rates directed mostly at Matt, I think. Could you talk about how much your members are paying for shipping rates this year compared to last year?
I mean, I think Gene did a great job of outlining kind of the overall marketplace. And to his point, a majority of our members don't use the spot market and have negotiated contracts that are being adhered to. And so I think a lot of the increase we've seen on the spot market just in the last few months has not impacted directly. But there's a capacity, people are trying to find capacity to move goods. And not all of our members are massive companies, right? We represent a lot of members that are medium-sized, non-publicly traded companies, or the vendors and suppliers and the agents to some of these big companies. And their ability to negotiate, to find access to capacity when capacity is limited is obviously limited based on their size and the volume that they're shipping. And so it's for us, it's not a kind of one size fits all. I can't give you one answer that would apply to each of our members because each are unique and the volumes that they're bringing in are unique. But for sure, rates have increased, and something we track every single day, and we provide that information to our members. And we're seeing a lot of concern about the environment we're in as it relates to the current rates that we're seeing.
Thank you, Matt. Looks like we have just one final question. It's a follow-up from Bill Mongaluzzo, so if anyone else has a question, now would be the time to drop it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Bill's following up, this one's for Gene. With strong import volumes expected to continue, what is the port doing to mitigate congestion at your container terminals?
Thanks, Bill, and that's absolutely job number one every day. This port, as we've learned from past history, has to remain a transit facility, not a warehouse. And when we look at those vital statistics, the first thing that draws my eye is the dwell time. That has to remain low, whether it's the truck, the on-dock rail, near dock. We've got to keep the high velocity of containers moving through this port. With data, as we've talked about through the Port Optimizer and other sources, market intel, which is why I travel as much as I do to make sure I keep my finger on the pulse, and those lessons learned from what we did during COVID and how we tried to improve, all of this is going to play into it. As I just said, we've got not only a strong market happening right now, but that strength is also accentuated by those extra loaders coming in, and we've got this line of sight to be prepared. But I've been so encouraged. Just last Friday, had a meeting over in Long Beach with Michelle Grubbs and the PMSA board of marine terminal operators, shipping lines, and really it was a great discussion around how the technical aspects of this port are working so well right now. All these vital statistics. And we've become so sensitized to any movement in these stats that when we see them, we jump in. For example, over the last 6 to 8 weeks, I see a little bit of a mini spike in on-dock rail dwell, and that draws everyone's attention. Alliances shifting a little bit, imports coming to a series of terminals, exports leaving from a different series, making sure we've got the engine power, the rail car, and the crewing matched up is absolutely sacrosanct to keeping those velocity levels high and the dwell times low. So once again, I like what we're doing, but it is a day-to-day effort. We can't take our eye off the ball, yet I do think we've learned so much and we've become a lot smarter than we were even just a couple of years ago. But we'll keep watching, Bill. Thanks again. Good point.
Thank you, Matt and Gene. That concludes the media questions. Gene, I'll turn it back to you for some final thoughts.
Well, as you can see, one of the best and the brightest in the industry. This is something we've known for a long time. Matt, can't thank you enough for joining us and sharing your insights today. My best to you and all the members for continued success, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Gene. It was an honor and privilege as always, my friend. Good to see you.
You too. Stay well. Finally, I want to highlight 2 new milestones here at the Port of Los Angeles. First, we just completed a $73 million Pier 400 rail expansion project. This expansion optimizes on-dock rail operations, improves roadway safety, and significantly reduces emissions by eliminating about 1,200 truck trips per day by the year 2040. After 3 years of planning and development, the expansion adjacent to APM terminals has added 6 miles of railway, 5 additional storage tracks, a rail bridge, and a new roadway. By increasing volume at the APM on-dock rail yard, this project effectively creates additional rail capacity for all terminals at the Port of Los Angeles, particularly those located on Terminal Island. It's worth noting that all 7 of our container terminals are equipped with on-dock rail facilities, which play a crucial role in connecting to the Alameda Corridor. The corridor handles about 10% of all waterborne containers in the U.S., making it a vital link in our trade infrastructure. We're grateful to the California Trade Commission and its Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, which provided nearly $22 million in grant funding for this project. In addition, the Port of Los Angeles scooped up the remaining $51 million to complete the project. Second, I'm so proud to announce that electric cargo top handlers, the first in the nation, are now in operation at Houston terminals right here at the Port of Los Angeles. These 5 battery-powered, human-operated top handlers are manufactured in Louisville, Mississippi by union labor at the Taylor Machine Works factory. They can run 2 full back-to-back work shifts. After a 5-hour charge, they're ready to go again. This equipment is the result of extensive real-world testing, prototyping, and development here in Los Angeles and back in Louisville. I commend Houston Terminals for its vision and leadership. Currently, we have 215 diesel top handlers in use at the port right now. And considering the top handlers account for 30% of all cargo handling emissions, this is a valuable opportunity to substantially reduce pollution. We still have a long way to go to fully transition by our goal of 2030, but it is a promising start. Our collective commitment to sustainable technology is paying off, effectively demonstrating the viability of this equipment right in front of us. The challenge now is to build demand, locally, nationally, and around the globe, for zero-emission cargo handling equipment. Both the Pier 400 rail expansion and the implementation of electric top handlers further advance our goals of efficiency and sustainability, as well as ensure our ongoing competitiveness. Thank you for joining us today. Take care, and we'll see you again in August.